Scott, just so you know, that's called a standing ovation, and that's really hard to get. Well done. Well done, my friend. Thank you for being with us and for blessing us, not just with your musical gifts, but with your story as well. Thank you for doing that. Good morning, church. So good to be with you. I'm already recognizing many familiar faces kind of coming back. Maybe the weather's a little bit cooler. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. And I also see some faces that I haven't seen before. And as always, I would love to have the opportunity to get to know you. If I haven't met you yet, would love to have the opportunity to do that. If you have a couple minutes right after the service, I'm going to be right down in front. If you want to stop by and say hi, I would really appreciate it. We have for several months been studying the life of Jesus through the lens of his best friend, John. And this morning we come to the end of John chapter 15. And I want to set this up by telling a quick story. Take you back in time. More than 20 years ago, there was a nationwide gathering with high school students all across the country. And it was an event called See You at the Pole. And some of you might remember it. Essentially, it was meant to rally high school students around their high school's flagpole so that they could pray together early in the morning before school started. And so that's what I did. I had really committed my life to Jesus Christ. That is to say, I took the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ seriously. And so when I heard about the event, I thought, yeah, I'd love to be a part of that. Didn't go as I expected exactly. I thought it would be rather easy. So there were about a dozen of us, and we gathered around the flagpole right out in front of Horizon High School, and we began to pray. But I was distracted, because over my shoulder, I could hear the voices of my peers. Other students had gathered, and they were shouting at us. They were mocking us. They were imitating us, but in a way that was meant to discourage us. And I remember thinking, this isn't as easy as I thought. Am I going to stay in this? I mean, the temptation was very real in that moment to walk away. I share that little story with you because in the last part of John chapter 15, Jesus continues to prepare the disciples for his departure, and the road ahead for them is not easy. Peter will deny knowing Jesus not once, but 3 times. The rest of the disciples scatter upon Jesus' arrest. It will not be easy for them, but Jesus understands a very simple principle. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. And Jesus had this revolution in mind. It would be a revolution of the heart, but in order for that to happen, he needs to capture the hearts of these men. So what is he going to say? He's going to continue to give them words of encouragement. He's going to give them words of warning. I was telling someone earlier, I feel like I need to give a disclaimer at this part in our study because for the last several weeks, it's not as if Jesus has been talking about rainbows and unicorns a whole lot. You know, it's like he's living in the shadow of the cross. And so a dying man's words are among his most important. And he has a mission in mind. He's about to go to the cross and die for the sins of the world. His investment is in these men. They're going to be world changers. He's got to lift them up, as we talked about last week. Prepare them for fruitfulness, as we talked about last week. And send them out. And it's going to be very, very difficult. And so he wants to forewarn them, and in doing so, forearm them. That's why as we read through the text, you'll notice Jesus saying more than once, remember. Remember my words. Hey, as things begin to unfold, remember this conversation because it's going to serve you very well. And so with this as the backdrop, we pick it up in John chapter 15, verse 18. Jesus says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If the world hates you, just know this, hated me first. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have been guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen. They've seen the works, and as a result, they've hated both me and my Father. But the word that is written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause. But when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, that's the Spirit of truth, the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness about me. So I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away, because that's going to be the temptation. Let me just pause there for a second. Does that ring true for you? Has it? This idea of falling away, is this whole thing real? Is this just a joke? Is this building a monument to lies? They will put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he is offering service to God. And they will do these things because they have not known the Father nor me. But I have said these things to you, that when the hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. First, I want us to notice that Jesus doesn't say to the disciples, you might be hated, but rather he says what? When. When. It's not an if, but it's a when. Jesus has discussed this previously in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5. The Apostle Paul has also spoken about it. Jesus says this, blessed are you when others revile you. Isn't that an interesting word, revile? You know what revile means? Essentially to detest something. Blessed are you when people detest you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. When you're praying to me and you're young and your peers look at you and they mock you, blessed are you. Paul says, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Not you might, but when. So here's what gets really interesting. The Greek word for persecute is actually a very strong word. It describes one who is being harassed, physically intimidated. In America, Christians aren't fed to the lions. However, in parts of the world, many parts of the world, every day, Christians are being killed for their faith. You realize that? We have in the back of the room every month, we have an update from a ministry called Voice of the Martyrs, and we have those publications out there so you can take them home, read them to your kids, read them as a family, and you know how to enter into praying for your brothers and sisters that are facing that kind of persecution all over the world. Churches are being burned in parts of the country. Imagine getting an email from me saying, listen, church, we're going to have to meet somewhere else this week, and here's why. Because they've set fire to the church. You have brothers and sisters that are experiencing persecution. Now, what we face probably doesn't fall into that definition of persecution, to be quite frank with you, to be candid with you. But Jesus says you will be reviled. You will be hated. And certainly, let's just put it this way. The culture in the world is not asking for more churches, are they? They're just not. So at some point, Jesus says to those who follow him, you are going to experience these hardships. Question, is this happening to you? Are you being reviled? Are you being rejected? If not, why? Are you keeping your identity a secret? Christians have done a lot of good in the world, and that is a tremendous understatement. I was having this conversation with my daughter the other day as we were discussing current events. And she's part of this group at school, and I'm very proud of her. She was selected to be essentially the Christian representative at her school, public school. And so we were having a very, very good discussion about current events, and I said, Faith, you realize that nothing has done more to elevate the status of women than Christianity, biblical Christianity. At a time when women were less than second-class citizens, Jesus says, she believes in me, she's your sister in Christ. She's co-equal with you, fellas. That's just unheard of. The testimony of women wasn't even admissible in court back in the day. And Jesus says, this is your sister. She's your co-equal. And treat her as such. Hospitals. It's kind of a half joke, but kind of serious. Where are the atheist hospitals? I can take you to the hospitals that have been started by Christians. Universities, education. Christians have had tremendous positive influence on the society. Even those who are secular have been blessed by the works and the actions of Christians. So, caring for the poor. Why would we be treated with contempt? You ever think about that? Why would Christians be treated with contempt? Why would we be hated, persecuted, and reviled? For two reasons, Jesus says. First, he says, we do not belong to the world. What does that even mean? What does that mean, belong to the world? You see, something's worldly. What does that mean? Well, from a biblical standpoint, 1 John chapter 2, verse 16 gives us three identifiers of the world. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. What is lust of the flesh? If it feels good, do it. If it looks good, get it. If it has anything to do with elevating your ego, making you feel superior to others, pursue it. Is this not Eve, Adam in the garden? Genesis 3, the text tells us that Eve looked at the fruit. Oh, and it was pleasing to the eye. And it was desirable to make one wise. What is that? That's all three. That's lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. She disobeyed. And of course, the rest is history. So that's what we mean by the world. It's this worldly system. If it feels good, if it looks good, if it has anything to do with elevating you over others. Now, here's the slippery slope in this whole thing. If you think it through, and don't be fooled by this now, the world loves to promote freedom of expression, but don't be duped into thinking that the world doesn't want to tie you to something. Yeah, the world promotes freedom of expression, but only that kind of expression that it approves. Everybody is tied to something. You will either be tied to the things of God or you will be tied to the things of this world. There is absolutely no middle ground. So how do you know what you are tied to? Ask yourself this simple question. What are the things that make you feel good about yourself? What are the things that make you feel good about yourself? Those things are very good indicators of what you are tying yourself to. So, for example, some of us, we are made to feel good about ourselves because of our wealth, our positions, our status, our careers, our physique, our looks, our intelligence. Now, in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with those things. But when we take good things and make them the priority, make them ultimate things in our lives, that is when we become undone. Because what happens when your looks fade? There goes your identity. What happens when your wealth is threatened? See, Jesus said, here's what happens in life. You start out in life, you don't have anything, and you're anxious. Gosh, I don't have anything. I don't have stuff. So what do? You start acquiring stuff. And then you get stuff. And then does the anxiety go away? No, because now what? You're anxious about losing it. See, it doesn't matter. Whatever you tie yourself to, it could be a relationship. which is great. But you know, people let you down. Oh, humans make lousy gods. And so the wonderful thing about giving yourself to Jesus Christ is that the good things in your life actually stay just that. They stay good things, and they don't become the ultimate things that you tie your worth and happiness to. And when this happens, you live such a radically different life. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who entered into a partnership with two other individuals, and the business did not go well, and they took on quite a bit of debt. And so my buddy began to pray because his partners approached him and said, we want to declare bankruptcy. Now, my friend was struggling with this, and we talked about it. And as he prayed, he felt convicted. And he went to his partners and said, as a Christian, I don't feel that this is the right thing for me to do in this particular circumstance at this time. So here's what I'm willing to do. I will absorb your debt. His partner's like, excuse me? How stupid are you? If you're willing to do that, you can take it. And he absorbed their debt. It took him about 3 years to pay off that debt. And one would think he would be ruined financially. But there were lenders who looked at him, heard the story, saw what he did, and they were happy to loan a man with that kind of integrity money. And his business is succeeding very, very well. What's happening there? Simple. The company wasn't his life. Money wasn't his life. Doing what he believed honored God was first in his life. It's the police officer who refuses to take bribes. And other police officers look at him like, suspicious of you now. You're not one of us. You're not playing the game. It's the Christian banker who leaves the industry because he just can't bring himself to play the games of greed that everybody else is playing around him. It's the high school student who refuses to enter into all of the high school or junior high drama that goes down. And you refuse to participate in the gossip and the mean girl stuff and the hateful words. And then all of a sudden you find that you don't have a place at the lunch table anymore. And you're living radically. You are the freest person on the planet. Do not let the world determine what freedom means for you. Freedom of expression, please. Their freedom of expression is very narrow, and it's confining, and it's restrictive, and it will lead you down a path you don't want to go. That's why I've said, Chris, you want to be radical? Be a Christian. Be a follower of Jesus Christ. You want to be truly free? You want to be free enough to think for yourself? Be a Christian. C. Everett Koop in 1982 was appointed the Surgeon General. And that's a big job. It's an important position. That's essentially, you are America's doctor. You're America's doctor. But the road there was a very difficult one for him. Those on the left called him unqualified. In fact, they referred to him as Dr. Unqualified. To those on the right, he was the perfect candidate. He was an evangelical Christian, and he was anti-abortion. And then an interesting thing happened once he obtained the position. He recognized quickly that AIDS was a very serious problem. Very, very serious problem. And at that time, it was primarily gay men that were being diagnosed with AIDS. And he said, we have to help. And so millions of dollars was funneled into AIDS research. And you had quite a few people on the right who were not happy about having money support AIDS research. Meanwhile, on the left, suddenly, to their surprise, he became their hero. What's going on there? He couldn't be owned. He couldn't be bought. See, the question of ownership had already been answered for him, because as a Christian, he'd read the Gospels and he got to the part about the Good Samaritan and realized, who's my neighbor? Anybody that's in need. Anybody that needs help, that's my neighbor. And these people need help. And so I'm doing this not for the left, not for the right, but I'm doing this because my master has told me this is what I do. And so it's interesting because oftentimes you have a position like that, and then when you retire, you get appointed to some other position. He got appointed to nothing. You know why? Because he couldn't be owned. He was way too independent. Why? Because he was a Christian. Therefore, he was truly a free thinker. So isn't it interesting what Christianity does to change a person? Christians are hated because they do not attach themselves to the world. There's a second reason, though. Jesus says why Christians are hated, and that's because he says, I was hated first. Now, why was Jesus hated? Because Jesus made some bold and audacious claims. Like what? Like no one comes to the Father but through me. That's one thing our culture does not like, exclusivity. In Augustine's Confessions, he tells the story of when he was a youth alongside a couple of his buddies, and they stole some pears. And reflecting on that time, he says, why did I do that? Why did I steal those pears? Was I hungry? No. Did I not have money? No, I had money to buy pears. And he says, I don't even like pears. Why did I steal them? Because it was forbidden. That's why. Because someone told me not to do it. And in telling me not to do it, it immediately assaulted my will and my desire and the expression of my desires over someone's attempt to control what I do or what I don't do. And it's so true. Within every person is this impulse to not be given to restrictions. And we Americans especially, we love our autonomy. Therefore, we get angry at limitations. So think about this. If the restriction of taking fruit makes us angry, then consider Jesus when he says, I am the only way to God. You want to test this theory out? Approach the average American and tell them that they owe God a huge debt. Approach the average American and tell them you are completely and totally lost apart from the saving work of Jesus Christ. And you gauge their response. Jesus says, you know why you're going to be hated? You preach his message, it started with him. They hate you because they hated me first. Many of you are familiar with the author Anne Rice. She has sold millions and millions of books. And while doing research for a book that had a Jesus character in it, she turned from being an atheist to a Christian. And one of the things that compelled her was in her research, she discovered the strong and vociferous bias against Jesus. And she'd never encountered anything like it in all of her historical studies in the past. Now, she was shocked at this discovery, but now realize that she's writing at a time when she's writing as a secular person. And she actually writes about this journey in her book, Christ the Lord, coming out of Egypt. And here's what she says. Many of these scholars who apparently devoted their life to New Testament scholarship, disliked Jesus Christ. Some pitied him as a hopeless failure. Others sneered at him, and some felt an outright contempt. I'd never come across this kind of emotion in any other field of research, at least not to this extent. It was puzzling. The people who go into Elizabethan studies don't set out to prove Queen Elizabeth I was a snickering fool. They don't personally dislike her. They don't make snickering remarks about her or spend their careers trying to pick apart her historical reputation. Occasionally a scholar studies a villain, yes, but even then, the author generally ends up arguing for the good points of a villain or for his or her place in history. But in general, scholars don't spend their lives in the company of historical figures whom they openly despise. But there are New Testament scholars who detest and despise Jesus Christ. In other words, what she's doing is she's looking at it from the outside, from a historical standpoint, and she says, whoa, time out, wait a minute. There is tremendous bias against Jesus Christ. Why is that? Why not against Queen Elizabeth? Because Queen Elizabeth never set out to change your life. Queen Elizabeth never said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Pears will not secure your eternal destination. You have no problem with pears. No fruit. Not a lot of people running around that are making claims like that. Jesus says, you want to know why they hate you? Because they hated me first. Several years ago, I was officiating a funeral. And when I got to the part where I said, Jesus went to prepare a place for you, I'm begging you to consider, have you prepared yourself to meet the one who went to prepare that place for you? And as I said that, a young man stood up. There's a few hundred people. This young man stood up. He was sitting on the aisle. And he said, this is, and I won't say it in church, yelled it out in front of everybody. And he walked out. Wow. That struck a nerve. Why? Why such a strong response to me? I'm, a lot of you guys know me. I'm pretty nice. I'm pretty likable. But not in that moment. Not in that moment. I mean, you get the sense you're around people that, man, you have some bad intentions. If you could kill me and get away with it, you would, wouldn't you? Jesus says, you're hated because you're not of this world. And what he means is, they don't own you, which is so great. Secondly, they hate you because they hated me first. So what do we do when this happens? Now, Jesus gives us the answer. He puts it like this in verse 20. A servant is not greater than his master. What does that mean? It means this. When you receive opposition for the right reason, realize that it is for your master. What does a servant do? A servant carries out the will of his master. So we need to make sure that the pushback we receive is for the master. It's for the right reason, because sometimes Christians are just flat out rude and obnoxious. How so? We attack, we criticize, we're condescending. And here's the thing. You're human, and you're fallen, and you're not going to do everything right. And if you start to take things personally, these attacks personally, you're going to stiffen up, and you're going to counterattack. And that is not the method, model, or means of Jesus Christ. We need to be in that place where we can admit when we have acted poorly. Jesus exhorts his disciples with one final saying when he says, don't be surprised by it. I was thinking about how, if you've ever been in the context of an intervention where you're sitting across from a loved one who is addicted to drugs, and when you enter into that conversation, the mindset is like this. Chances are they're probably not going to receive this well. So that's what you're thinking. You think this is going to be very difficult. They're probably not going to be quick to receive what we have to say. But man, do we love them, and we need to speak to them, and we care about them. And so you're in the midst of this intervention, and as you begin to talk, yep, there it goes. It happens. The person stands up, shouts, walks out, slams the door. Are you shocked? Are you stunned when they do that? No. Why? Because they are in denial. Every human is in denial about their need for Jesus. So why would you be surprised when, for many, you present the gospel and they say, how dare you? I've told you before, the greatest conversation I've had, I've been at the church 2.5 years, and one of the greatest conversations I met with a young lady, and I said, tell me what you think about the church. She said, you want me to be honest? I said, yeah, be honest. She said, I don't like you. It was so good. It was so good. She said, I don't like you. I said, well, tell me more about that. All right, I got to make some changes. No, I don't. Because what she said is, you tell me there's something wrong with me. You tell me that I'm a sinner separated from God. And secretly I'm like, yes, I'll take that all day long. If that's what upsets you about me, and since then I think we've gone on to become friends. Jesus didn't avoid persecution, so neither should we. So real quickly, how do you get the power to act, to reach out, to make your identity known? I'm going to share this with you quickly. I love this passage, Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. One of my favorite passages in all of the New Testament. It's Paul describing what Jesus went through on our behalf, but I love the King James Version. I love this translation. It says this, who, referring to Jesus, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Look at this. But made himself of no reputation. That's a powerful translation. So here's what he's saying. Jesus had the ultimate good name. What was that good name? Equal with God. That's a good one. And what did he do? He gave it up to become a man. Why would he do that? For you. You follow? Jesus gave up his good name for you. You can probably do the same. Consider yourself of no reputation. It's not about you. It's about him. There's an old black and white movie called Angels with Dirty Faces. It's probably 80 years old. And it's about two men that take two very different paths in life. One becomes a priest. The other becomes a gangster. His name is Rocky. And Rocky is eventually caught and sentenced. And during his sentencing, he learns it's the electric chair. And so before going to the electric chair, the priest meets with him, and the priest says, Rocky, I need you to do something. I need you to go to the electric chair, kicking and screaming and pleading for your life, begging for mercy. Rocky says, why would I do that? Why are you asking me to give up the only thing I have, my pride, my reputation as a gangster? Why would you ask me to give that up? And the priest says, because there's a lot of young boys in this town, and they admire you, and they follow you, and they want to be like you, and they need to be ashamed of you. They need to see you as a groveling coward. And so he's being led to the electric chair, and he's realizing there's truth to that. These kids are going to go down the same path that he's going down now. And so in the final scenes of the movie, there's a shadow. You just see it's all done in shadows. It's filmed in a really cool way. And you see him pleading for his life, and he's crying, and the priest begins to cry when he observes what's happening. And then the next day, the kids open up a newspaper, and the headline reads, Rocky is a yellow coward. And the kids close the paper and they say, man, we don't want to be anything like that guy. You know what that is? That's substitutionary atonement. That's having something and letting it go for the sake of another person. So when you're hated, when you're persecuted, can you please see Jesus for what he did for you? Hey, who cares what people think? Your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. You're going to be just fine. You're going to be doing great. It's those around you. They need you to consider yourself, perhaps, as having no reputation and stepping out, speaking words that they need to hear. Why do we do Treat Street? Is it to feed our kids candy? No. It's so that we can invite people and they can encounter the church. And I don't mean this building. I'm talking about you. All of you amazing, wonderful people. I want more of them to encounter more of you so that more of them will want to become more of you so that we can reach more of them. That's why we do what we do. And don't make the mistake of saying no for other people. Oh, they would never come. They would never. They're too busy. Don't say no on behalf of other people. Let them say no. You ask. Chances are, because I know who you are, they're probably going to say yes to you. Consider yourself of no reputation. Father, what a beautiful text again. Jesus, it's all about you. You're the example in all things. Father, implant within us the desire to make ourselves low, to make Jesus high, so that we can live radical lives. Audience of one, knowing what Jesus did for us on the cross. We ask it in his mighty and powerful name. That's the name of Jesus Christ. And God's people said, amen.